Good evening, and welcome to The Person's Podcast, the podcast that isn't copying the People's Podcast, but is its own thing itself. Today, the topic is Norse mythology and the foundation it creates for different sorts of mediums, such as video games and movies. If we take a look at Norse mythology, there's plenty of examples for it today. We have it being used in Hollywood films, Marvel films, all around the world in different movies. And then we also have it being seen in, fantasy worlds of books and fantasy games and all sorts of different historical. It serves a lot of different purposes for what it provides. So if we take a look at perhaps Thor, the popular movie franchise by Marvel, there's 3 movies in the trilogy for Thor, I would say. If you take a look at Ragnarok, the most recent one, it builds a lot of the world more based off of the Norse mythology view. While the other 2 have ties to Norse mythology, the third one takes a much more in-depth look and elaborates on some of the sort of glossed over aspects. You have Ragnarok, the event itself. You have the Valkyries. You have Surtur. You have Hela. You have all these different characters and groups and events that are in Norse mythology, but were never expanded upon in the actual Thor movies, right? The Thor movies are, the first 2 are considered to be quite bad, but it's not really dependent or based off of them being, Norse mythology. It makes them bad. It's just, a movie, writing, and all that stuff. But it still builds a good foundation for the writing to develop on, I suppose. So I think it provides a really strong foundation, and whether or not you use the foundation correctly, for Ragnarok, they did a wonderful job on elaborating on their foundation, and you see where that went. The other 2 didn't really elaborate on any of it, and they kind of flopped. If we look at perhaps video games, we have some of the most popular ones in recent years. Skyrim, God of War, both fantastic games. However, Skyrim, it is probably 8 years old, 9 years old now, and it still tends to, surface every now and again. It's a game that refuses to die because it is such a nostalgic, such a big game that kind of maybe didn't revolutionize the gaming world, but inspired a lot of things. Skyrim is the type of game that is so expansive in the lore and world, with so many things to do, that it continues to prosper. Part of that is, in my opinion, is because of its extreme use of Norse mythology. It uses everything from races to characters to spells to the landscape to the history to all these different types of things. It takes so much of it, rebrands it, renames it, and then does its own thing with it. And, so many of those things are the things that bring people back to Skyrim. People talk about the Dwemer and the elves and all the different races and historical places there. And so much of it is based back in Norse mythology and its roots. And I think it's kind of cool that, a game that, 9-10 years later down the line, that continues to prosper and do well, that it has so many ties back to Norse mythology and its foundation, that I feel like it shows how great of a foundation it is. And it shows that elaborating and expanding on the foundation that's already set can lead to so many greater things. Now, when it comes to God of War, I personally haven't played it much. However, I did some research, and it used to be based off of the Greek mythology. A lot of the gods in the game and stuff. And God of War is a series of games that has done also really well on PS4 for a number of years. God of War, the most recent one, however, took some changes from Greek mythology, and they introduced a lot of Norse mythology, which is kind of weird to just, 180 flop to a different mythology, but there's so many connections between different mythologies that it sort of ties in still, and it doesn't change too much. Norse mythology or God of War took pieces like the beasts and monsters. They took Mimir and all those different things. Jormungand, the Midgard Sir, all those things. They took it and added it to their game, and no one really seemed to notice, that the whole history and mythology just sort of got changed. It sort of took pieces from Norse mythology, good foundational pieces that fit within the foundation they already built. I would say it's not only just good as like a base foundation itself, but I would rather say that it could be used in any situation. It could be used as the base, such as, in Thor and in Skyrim, but it can also be used as a way to build upon a already existing foundation, like in God of War. There's lots of different things you could say for it. Doing a lot of research, I didn't really notice how big of a thing it was, or how common it was. I always enjoyed it and thought it was really cool, but I never noticed that it was, in some of these games like God of War and Skyrim. I guess it's that sort of thing that you don't really look into. But it's kind of cool to see that it provides so much stuff. Without Norse mythology, some of these games might not even exist, let alone be as good as they are if they did. And I feel like that's kind of an important thing, and that it should be, recognized that without it, we wouldn't have the things that we have now. Some of the highly regarded things in the gaming industry and culture. Taking a look at, Pokemon X and Y, the Pokemon games that introduced the new generation of the 3DS and all the new consoles and all those things for the Nintendo. It was one of the biggest games. One of the biggest, I believe it was the first worldwide release. It did amazingly well. I'm not sure if it quite, outsold other games, but it sold extremely well, and it's usually regarded with pretty good reviews. The gaming community tends to switch every few or so years. I've seen people complain about a game the first year, and then the second year it's a classic. It's one that they wouldn't even say anything bad about. It's kind of weird with the gaming culture, or like other people, how they flip so often. I remember, Pokemon Sun and Moon. A lot of people hated it, especially when it first came out. Everyone just despised it, and then a few years down the line, people think it's a good game. They tend to switch so often, and so as far as I remember right now, X and Y is, regarded as one of the good games. And with what they did, they have their legendary Pokemon. They took Zygarde, Yveltal, Xerneas, and based them off of three of the beings from Norse mythology, which, although it's not really important, the legendary design, I guess, is sort of a staple. It's sort of like the draw factor, I guess. They use the legendaries as the cover photo. If you see a game, part of that cover photo, influences you and can cause you to buy the game. And not to say that Norse mythology itself is the reason that the game sold. However, the designs for the legendaries were some of the cooler ones that we've had in years. I still think the trio from that generation is pretty cool. There's a lot of different things to take into account. It's sort of Norse mythology, I guess. If I had to like give it a big like final thing, is it provides a lot of things, not only for the world, like the landscape, but also for characters, events. It provides a foundation and adds to existing foundations in multiple aspects. It provides a lot of interesting things that people enjoy, especially in this day and age. And it's something that probably is important, I'd say. Without it, we wouldn't have a lot of the games and memories that we do, because so much of it was present in a lot of the things that we did. Without it, without the foundation, without what it's added to other foundations, we more than likely wouldn't have had the experience that we have had, and I think it's kind of important to recognize that. And for that reason, I would just like to say that it was pretty nice researching this topic, and it's been a very short person's podcast, but Norse mythology is very, important, and it's good to recognize all of the things that it provided for us without even, realizing that it has. But I think we should recognize it, and this is what this will be for. This has been the person's podcast, a very bad version, but good. It's a good one.